gentle knight. But now, to tell you all of his array, his deeds were good, but yet he was not gay. Of simple fustian war he had juppen, sadly discoloured by his habergeon, for he had lately come from his voyage, and now was going on this pilgrimage. The Squire. With him there was his son, a youthful squire, a lover and a lusty bachelor, with locks well curled, as if they'd lain in press. Some 20 years of age he was, I guess. In stature he was of an average length, wondrously active, aye, and great of strength. He'd ridden sometime with the cavalry, in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well within that little space, in hope to win thereby his lady's grace. Prinked out he was, as if he were a mead, all full of fresh-cut flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day, he was so fresh, as is the month of May. Short was his gown, with the sleeves both long and wide. Well could he sit on horse and fairly ride. He could make songs and words therein indite, joust and dance too, as well as sketch and write. So hot he loved that, while night told her tale, he slept no more than does a nightingale. Courteous he and humble, willing and able, and carved before his father at the table. The yeoman. A yeoman had he, nor more servants know at that time, for he chose to travel so, and he was clad in coat and hood of green, a sheaf of peacock arrows bright and keen. Under his belt he bore right carefully, well could he keep his tackle yeomanly. His arrows had no draggled feathers low, and in his hand he bore a mighty bow. A cropped head had he, and a sun-browned face, of woodcraft knew he all the useful ways. Upon his arm he bore a bracer gay, and at one side a sword and buckler, yea, and at the other side a dagger bright, well sheathed and sharp as spear point in the light. On breast a Christopher of silver sheen, he wore a horn in baldric all of green. A forester he truly was, I guess. The Prioress. There was also a nun, a Prioress, who in her smiling modest was and coy. Her greatest oath was but by Saint Eloy, and she was known as Madame Eglantine. Full well she sang the services divine, intoning through her nose becomingly, and fair she spoke her French and fluently. After the school of Stratford at the bow, for French of Paris was not hers to know. At table she had been well taught withal, and never from her lips let morsels fall, nor dipped her fingers deep in sauce, but ate with so much care the food upon her plate, that never driblets fell upon her breast. In courtesy she had delight and zest. Her upper lip was always wiped so clean, that in her cup was no iota seen of grease when she had drunk her draught of wine. Becomingly she reached for meat to dine, and certainly delighting in good sport, she was right pleasant, amiable, in short. She was at pains to counterfeit the look of courtliness and stately manners took, and would be held worthy of reverence. But to say something of her moral sense, she was so charitable and piteous, that she would weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, beasts, she'd 3. The monk. A monk there was, one made for mastery, an outrider who loved his venery, a manly man to be an abbot able, full many a blooded horse had he in stable, and when he rode men might his bridle hear a jingling in the whistling wind as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell, where this brave monk was master of the cell. The rule of Maurus or Saint Benedict, by reason it was old and somewhat strict. This said monk let such old things slowly pace, and followed new world manners in their place. He cared not for that text a clean plucked hen, which holds that hunters are not holy men, nor that a monk, when he is cloisterless, is like unto a fish that's waterless. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. But this same text he held not worth an oyster, and I said his opinion was right good. What, should he study as a madman would, upon a book in cloister cell, or yet go labour with his hands and swing and sweat, as Austin bids? How shall the world be served? Let Austin have his toil to him reserved, therefore he was a rider day and night. Greyhounds he had as swift as bird in flight, since riding and the hunting of the hare were all his love, for no cost would be spare. I saw his sleeves were purfled at the hand, with fur of grey, the finest in the land. Also, to fasten hood beneath his chin, he had of good wrought gold a curious pin. A love knot in the larger end there was. His head was bald and shone like any glass, and smooth as one anointed was his face. Fat was this lord, he stood in goodly case, his bulging eyes he rolled about, and hot they gleamed and red like fire beneath the pot. His boots were soft, his horse of great estate. Now certainly he was a fine prelate. He was not pale as some poor wanted ghost, a fat swan loved he best of any roast. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. The Friar. A friar there was, a wanton and a merry, a limiter, a very festive man. In all the orders four is none that can equal his gossip and his fair language. He had arranged full many a marriage of women young, and this at his own cost. Unto his order he was a noble post, well liked by all, and intimate was he with franklins everywhere in his country, and with the worthy women of the town, for at confessing he'd more power in gown, as he himself said, than good curate, for of his order he was licent. He heard confession gently, it was said, gently absolved too, leaving naught of dread. He was an easy man to give penance, when knowing he should gain a good pittance. For to a begging friar, money given is sign that any man has been well shriven. For if one gave, he dared to boast of this, he took the man's repentance not amiss. For many a man there is so hard of heart, he cannot weep however pains may smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, men should give silver to poor friars all bare. His tippet was stuck, always full of things, it is evident, and he could romp as well as any whelp. On love days could he be of mickle help, for there he was, hot not, like a cloisterer, with threadbare cope, as is the poor scholar, but he was like a lord or like a pope, of double worsted was his semi-cope, that rounded like a bell. As you may guess, he lisped a little out of wantonness, to make his English soft upon his tongue, and in his harping, after he had sung, his 2 eyes twinkled in his head as bright as to the stars within the frosty night. This worthy limiter was named Hubert. The merchant. There was a merchant with forked beard and girt in motley gown, and high on horse he sat, upon his head a Flemish beaver hat. His boots were fastened rather elegantly. He spoke his nations outright pompously, stressing the times when he had won not lost. He would the sea were held at any cost, across from Middleborough to Orwell town. At money changing he could make a crown. This worthy man kept all his wits well set. There was no one could say he was in debt. So well he governed all his trade affairs, with bargains and with borrowings and with shares. Indeed, he was a worthy man withal, but sooth to say his name I can't recall. The clerk. A clerk from Oxford was with us also, who turned to getting knowledge long ago. As meagre was his horse as his a rake, nor he himself too fat, I'll undertake. But he looked hollow and went soberly. Right threadbare was his overcoat, for he had got him yet no churchly benefice, nor was so worldly as to gain office, for he would rather have at his bed's head some 20 books, all bound in black and red, of Aristotle and his philosophy, than rich robes, fiddle, or gay solitary. Yet, and for all he was philosopher, he had but little gold within his coffer, but all that he might borrow from a friend on books and learning he would swiftly spend, and then he'd pray right busily for the souls of those who gave him wherewithal for schools of study. Took he utmost care and heed, not one word spoke he more than was his need, and that was said in fullest reverence, and short and quick and full of high good sense. Pregnant of moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. The lawyer. A sergeant of the law, wary and wise, who'd often gone to Paul's Walk to advise. There was also compact of excellence, discreet he was, and of great reverence. At least he seemed so, his words were so wise. Often he sat as justice in his eyes, by patent or commission from the crown. Because of learning and his high renown, he took large fees and many robes could own. So great a purchaser was never known. All was fee simple to him, in effect, wherefore his claims could never be suspect. Nowhere a man so busy of his class. And yet he seemed much busier than he was. All cases and all judgments could he cite, that from King William's time were apposite, and he could draw a contract so explicit, not any was his very son, that held opinion that a full delight was true felicity, perfect and right, a householder, and that a great was he, St. Julian he was in his own country. His bread and ale were always right well done, a man with better cellars there was none. Baked meat was never wanting in his house, of fish and flesh, and that so plenteous, it seemed to snow therein both food and drink, of every dainty that a man could think. According to the season of the year, he changed his diet and his means of cheer. Full many a fattened partridge did he mew, and many a bream and pike in fish pond too. Woe to his cook, except the sauces were poignant and sharp, and ready all his gear. His table, waiting in his hall alway, stood ready covered through the livelong day. At county sessions was he lord and sire, and often acted as a knight of shire. A dagger and a trinket bag of silk hung from his girdle, white as morning milk. He had been sheriff and been auditor, and nowhere was a worthier vavasor. The haberdasher and the carpenter. A haberdasher and a carpenter. The weaver, the dyer, and the arras maker. An arras maker, dyer, and weaver were with us, clothed in similar livery, all of one sober great fraternity. Their grate was new and well adorned it was. Their weapons were not cheaply trimmed with brass, but all with silver, chastely made and well. Their girdles and their pouches too I tell. Each man of them appeared a proper burgess, to sit in Guildhall on a high dais, and each of them, for wisdom he could span, was fitted to have been an alderman. For chattels they'd enough, and two of rent, to which their good wives gave a free assent, or else for certain they had been to blame. It's good to hear, madam, before one's name, and go to church when all the world may see, having one's mantle borne right royally. The cook. A cook they had with them, just for the nonce, to boil the chickens with the marrow bones, and flavour tartly and with gallingale. Well could he tell a draught of London ale. And he could roast and seethe and broil and fry, and make a good thick soup and bake a pie. But very ill it was, it seemed to me, that on his shin a deadly sore had he, for sweet blancmange he made it with the best. The sailor. There was a sailor